This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 83.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt, the overall farmer Rogers. Matt, what's going on, my man? How's summer treating you?
I was thinking you were saying overall as in like general umbrella, not the attire. Summer is going very well. I know this episode will come out when we are back in school, but summer has been relatively good to us. How about you, buddy?
It's going well. I'm in a new house for day 4, still in search of my studio space. This area that I'm currently in will do for now because it's not echoing, but it is my bedroom, so this will not be an applicable place during our typical Tuesday late night recording. So I'll still be in search of that space. Got to figure out what I can do in the basement before I start finishing it. But summer is good. I have a vacation coming up, which I'm looking forward to as well. So we had an awesome conversation with a gentleman named Terry Wetzel, who he'll share has retired from K-12 public. He is still involved in education, but I was really excited to have such a newly retired teacher. I think he might be our first ever retired teacher overall. We've had some speakers like Jimmy Casas and Adam Welcome who moved out of public ed and have gone into the private sector as well, but not fresh off the beat like Terry was. So, what was your biggest takeaway from our conversation today, Matt?
I think the main thing that I took away was if you love what you're doing, then you can still be refreshed by teaching it towards the end of your career. I mean, you'll hear that he goes from the classroom to administrative role and comes back to the classroom. And I think that it is refreshing to see someone that just did it for the right reasons and was able to navigate all of those pitfalls, seamless. I'm sure he wouldn't say seamlessly, but was able to kind of navigate through and get towards the end of the career, and still love what he was doing all the time. And what seems like, continuing to push for a better Mr. Wetzel's classroom every single year, not necessarily phoning it in, not necessarily, just pushing the same lesson plan over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. What I appreciated about the conversation was his encouragement to take ownership ourselves in the way we act amongst our professionals, the way we carry ourselves with students, the way we are aiding and supporting or diminishing the culture of our building, and being individual leaders ourselves. I thought was super valuable to hear, and I think it's important for us to kind of keep that perspective at the forefront at all times, that we have a direct impact on how our colleagues view the work experience as well as the way the students experience it. We talked a lot about innovation. So is there anything that because you have done a lot over the years with bringing robotics and different STEM aspects into your classroom and being, quote unquote, innovative. Is there anything that you heard today that kind of sparked you to think, oh, I need to do that again, or I need to do this a little bit different to make your classroom maybe a little bit more innovative this coming year?
Great question. I think the main thing that I would say is being innovative is exhausting. Trying to feel like you need to do something better and bigger And I think through the conversation, I realized that innovation is more about the student experience than it is making something flashy that you can put on Twitter. I don't know about you, Ken. My snowball effect was I would do something silly in my classroom, tweet it out, and get, 3 likes. And that was enough motivation to be like, oh, that was fun. Let me try it again. And you get like 6 likes on Twitter or something on Facebook. And that motivation was honestly selfish, but it led to innovation because it was encouraging and validating that what I was doing was innovative and good for kids. And I left conversation with Terry just kind of feeling like the end result is what we are trying to innovate, which is an experience for kids that prepares them to be a great member of our society that have the tools to be successful. And so that was the main thing because, I would love to go into next school year and say, I'm just going to do the same projects that I did last year. I know they're innovative. And I always feel that pressure of trying to do bigger, better. Um, but sometimes it can just be looking at that same project, and innovation may be putting it more into the students' hands, their own creativity, where they take it, and less what did I create. Ken, I feel like your end of things, when you were in the classroom, you often talked about how you worked so much more before the kids even came in for the lesson. How do you feel like, maybe being detached from the classroom right now, in more of an advisory role, how do you feel like you can continue to spark innovation, or how do you kind of, um, continue to have those conversations that motivate teachers to push them to themselves to that next level over and over again?
Yeah, I really like what you said about focusing on the student experience versus the
Of course you
the
did.
video or the picture. Yeah, exactly. What I would say as a coach now, I at the end of this past year, I had the opportunity to really rethink a unit with a stat teacher, and we created a totally different experience for the students in relation to surveying, and it was actually we actually made it the final of the course, this project, and it really was a great experience for the students and for the teacher. And so kind of leveraging that to build momentum with other teachers in that department, as in the school, just looking at what skills can the students learn in addition to the content that they're learning. And we kind of talked about that in our conversation with Terry today, looking at those two spheres. And the question that I or the idea that I propose to the teacher is, in doing this, the curriculum may flop a bit, and but they're still going to leave with all of these other skills throughout the course of the project. Whereas if you just teach it, the curriculum could still flop, and then they gain nothing. And so I look forward to hopefully even just doing that type of thing with one more teacher. One more year in and year out, just trying to build that momentum. So I kind of look forward to that opportunity. So I think we've been droning on here enough. Let's get to the real thing here, and let's bring Mr. Terry Wetzel into the interview with us.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Terry. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing today?
I'm great. Hi, Ken.
Thank you so much for joining us. So to kick things off, please just officially introduce yourself. Let us know where you're coming from, and just give us a snapshot of your career in education.
You bet. My name is Terry Wetzel. I'm in Green Bay, Wisconsin, as we speak. I recently retired from actively working in education. I'm still working, and I had about 28 years in the profession, all in districts in northeastern Wisconsin. Spent some time as a teacher, a technology coordinator, and administrator, and sort of ended up at the end of my career right back in the teaching uh, arena of education by choice. It's just where I found the most satisfaction. So, a varied career. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I think sometimes right now in education, there's some throwing around of the term burned out or things like that with education, but I did not feel that way. I was still energized right up to the end of my time in education. And to be clear, I worked primarily with high school students, has been my level, and upper high school juniors and seniors. So,
Excellent. So over that span of 28 years, what would you say? Because we so often hear that students are different today, and I've heard conflicting things from varying teachers. Yeah, kids are different today as society changes. I'm a different parent than my parents were. Adults are different today. What would you say is what would you say that you agree with that in terms of how students are different today than when you first started your first couple of years, but also what do you see has carried through the decades that kids are still just kids like they were 28 years ago?
yeah, you bet. That's a good question, Ken. Well, first of all, they should be different. Society's different. We're different. I mean, we should embrace that, not approach it from, oh, kids are so different nowadays than I was young. Well, of course they are. They should be. We are, and we should grow. But they still thrive on caring, kind teachers. They still thrive on relationships. They do want to be challenged. I think on many levels, students want to please their teacher, if you will. But there are a lot of distractions nowadays. And I have a saying, I'm sure I took it from someone. I don't think we should use things like social media less. We just need to use these things wiser, and we need to continue to do a good job of capitalizing on them in education. We're not as innovative as we think we are sometimes in education. We are doing our best, but education hasn't moved as quickly on an innovation scale as I would like to see it. And we have to keep those discussions open. So, sure, students are different, but they're also very much the same. And we can never lose sight of the fact that we're that variable. We're the adult in the room. We're the ones that uh, can guide, and I hate to use the word control, but to control the interaction. So we're the ones there. No complaining. We need to bring our A game each and every day. I also have a saying, and I'm sure some of my students could repeat it, but it's be epic, not average. The world has enough average. So.
I think it's an interesting perspective, and it's refreshing to be on. Ken and I have been teaching about the same amount of time at this point. I've been teaching 13 years now. And I think Ken and I can both say that, even through a pandemic, we are as in love with teaching as when we started. Even, more empowered now because we feel like we have the tools in the classroom to know how to really make a difference. There's a, fumbling around early in the career, hoping that you're making the impact that you wanted to. And it's refreshing to hear you towards the tail end of your career, at least in education, and also going back into the classroom. I just want to kind of like go through that perspective of um, so the pathway of your career led you back to the classroom, and I think it's at the heart of why we teach. It's at the epicenter of our values and why we got into it. Did you, when talking about that burnout, was it the transition back in to get back to making the impact you wanted to? Was it the fulfillment side of thing? Why did you choose at the end of your career, where you probably had a position you were really good at, that gave you maybe more freedom and wasn't so taxing? Why did you feel like it was the best decision to go back into the classroom at that time?
Sure. So the trajectory of my career at at some point I was a full-time administrator, an assistant principal, a principal, and I just really started doing some soul searching about was there any sort of role where I could still have some time in the classroom and perhaps continue to leverage some of my skills gained as an administrator, and I found something like that. at the end of my career, I became the administrator of a charter school in Wisconsin in a small town near Green Bay, while still having a teaching portion of my contract or my assignment. So it became kind of the best of both worlds for me. And some people, probably raise some eyebrows at that. Generally when people are an administrator, they don't go back to the teaching world. But I think we just have to make some of those courageous decisions. And I had been a track and cross country coach early in my career, and I kind of had some pangs in my heart of getting back into that. And just the relatively perfect situation sort of, and I don't believe things fall into our lap, we make things happen. But it kind of came up that there was a cross country coach opening, a teacher opening, and they were seeking someone that had their admin license to oversee this charter school. So it all just kind of fell into place, and I was very happy being back in the classroom.
One of those positions that
It's
had
fun.
your name on it. Literally, all
Yeah.
those.
Big, big time,
Yeah,
big
they're thinking,
time.
where are we ever going to
Um,
find a track coach, teacher, administrator? Those don't exist.
Yeah.
So that's
yes,
perfect.
yes,
And it's
yes.
go ahead.
And that the story even gets quirkier. Um, I was sitting in my office in a different district, pondering what my next career move would be. My children were older and graduating from high school and moving along. And I went on a particular site in Wisconsin. It's called WeCan. It's where you look for education positions. And this position that appears to have been scripted for me was posted that morning that I went on to look at it. So I think we just have to keep an open mind to some of those things where we can use our talents best.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear that. And so I'm now an instructional coach after being primarily fifth grade teacher and a STEM teacher. And just probably about a week ago, having this time off, reflecting, I came to the realization that I I can only be a coach for probably a couple more years, because I'm feeling very detached from a school community. I'm primarily at district office or bouncing around to multiple schools. The one advantage I have, I've mentioned this before, all of the kids that I taught for so long are now in middle school and high school, and I'm a secondary instructional coach. So it's kind of filling that void of missing that. And I am a certified administrator, but from my personal life side, I don't want to give up my summers yet because my kids are so young. And so, I came to the realization that when my time as a coach is done, because I need to be a part of a community, if I'm not ready to jump into admin, um, I'm going back to the classroom because, there's so much refining that I want to do myself. There's so much I've learned from this podcast. There's so much I've learned as a coach that I kind of want to put it back into action to kind of, you know, grease those wheels again and get those things moving for me in a positive direction. So I think it's great when people have an open mind like you did and realize that, you know, what's important is you're doing what makes you happy. So you mentioned earlier that you don't think teachers are as innovative as we think we are. What do you mean by that? Because I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well, I didn't say teachers. I said in education.
Got it. Sorry.
Um,
Yep.
um, I do. I mean, think about your education. Think about when you were a young adult in high school. Have things really changed that much in the last 10, 15, 20 years? Outside of the technology tools, I'm not sure that things have changed that much. Perhaps it's just my perspective, but I stand by what I said very much. I think we have to continue to have discussions at all levels about how we can be more innovative in education. We have to serve our customers. And the traditional school day of give or take 8 to 3, and while we can break that day up, there's been block scheduling, there's been different sort of how long a class period should be, and this and that. I don't think we're getting real far with those discussions relative to the level of innovation we need. Um, so I don't profess to have any or all of the answers for that, but I feel that it's really important about ways we can innovate. And COVID we learned some things from COVID. While it was a terrible time in our country, I think in education we should be reflecting about what we learned, what worked, what didn't work. I do think some things could be leveraged that we learned during that time. Again, my perspective is primarily the high school level, but I think we have to keep talking about ways we can innovate and not be so boxed in by the traditional schedule, traditional offerings of school. I think we have to be a little more innovative with the classes we have. I really like this concept of perhaps like what I would call mini courses at the high school level, where there's just pockets of exposure to topics. Maybe it's just for 3 weeks, maybe it's for 2 weeks, maybe it's about a student's area of interest. Maybe they take a mini course and they say, I'm not much for that. Well, that's okay too. But we have to continue to nurture curiosity and not stifle it, if you will. I think there are some topics at the high school level that we could probably get rid of. Do we need a class on that? You can Google a lot of things, and then your efforts could go towards learning other topics if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, I just want to, piggyback off of that. So, my school district is a very small school district in Lancaster County, a fairly conservative in the sense of, you know, um, let's do a lot of things how we've done it for a long time. And what we realized was we had students that were being set up for traditional pathways. You could either go to college or you could get a job right after high school. And the cycle of not really choosing where you wanted your life to go, because the high school experience wasn't prepared for that. And so, our high school luckily has become kind of like a model of, what high school should be. you know the first 2 years are very, core classes, but it's heavy internships. It's, if you're on a college track, it's leaning in that direction. And I guess my feeling is I'm so proud of what they do already. As a fourth grade teacher, I just kind of am in my bubble of, that traditional teaching practice. But one of the things that I'm fascinated by is I can see how it works in a grade level of 60 to 80 kids. But how do you scale it to a larger size school district? Like Ken's school district, a grade level might be the entire size of our high school. How do you feel like we can shift that scale to make it more appropriate for high school students and get them more prepared? Because if a kid wants to go into trade, get them training when, we had a guest talk about how the 4 years they're in high school is, the time that they can learn for free, as opposed to learning on their own dime or, through accidents after graduation. So how can we scale this, or what is kind of your visions of how, if you're saying you want this to be innovative, that you could see it growing and be the best version of education for kids?
I think to some extent you almost answered your question there, Matt. I think we start with pockets of innovation because there are always going to be, pockets of innovation, whether even in a big district, as you said, Ken is in. So whether it be an individual classroom or a school within a school per se, and I know the terminology differs around the U.S., but you have to replicate those pockets of innovation. You have to, and I hate to use cliches, but you have to get the appropriate stakeholders around the table, from parents to admin to students. Your student council at a high school level should be involved with some of these discussions. So, and you've got to be strong. You've got to be persistent and say that we don't. And there's going to be naysayers. It's going to be the same people that say, "Well, we didn't have it that way when I was in high school," or, "Yeah, we want better for our students and children now. Of course we do." So we replicate those models of innovation. We get the right people in front of the right stakeholders, and we push. We push and push to do that because it's right for kids. It's best for kids.
I think the hardest part that I'll just add, and then Ken, I'll let you take over. But the hard part is the theory, the educational theory is very clear and it sells itself, but with no blueprint or plan of what it should look like. That is the challenge. And I feel like, you know this is beyond education, but if there is no roadmap of how you can, like, what is the end goal, what is the extent that you're pushing the boundaries too far, you can get stakeholders on board, but then it's a lot of ownership on the administrators and the teachers and the students. And it's a big portion too. Like, when they are really invested in their own learning, there is student burnout. They work their tails off, and they can only push so far while still being a high school student. That I think it's fascinating that even if it's all in that right direction, there's a it's a big undertaking beyond just the education theory and getting everyone on the right side of the bus.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's such a rich topic, and I think it's so important because I like what you're saying about those mini courses. I feel like sometimes we forget, especially in the high school level, that they're still kids. They're not even 18. They don't have to know what they want to do when they graduate, let alone when they're 20. But what skills are they learning? And so, when I would approach teaching as a fifth grade teacher, it was okay, this is what I have to teach, but what do I have to, what can I use in this time to teach them other skills, whether that be communication, whether that be problem solving, all these different things. And when I look at high school classes a lot, I often think, what skills are you teaching them while you're diving into the curriculum that you have to teach them? And how can we make the skills more apparent? How can we make it more apparent to students that if you take this film class, these are the skills you're going to gain during that time? I think about, my kids are very young, they're not even in public education yet, but I think about them when they get to high school. I absolutely want them to enroll in some of the tech courses, and to go to the technical schools, because I've been very fortunate. I'm pretty handy. I can do plumbing, electrical, all that stuff because my dad has taught me, and I hope to teach them someday. But I also want them to look at this and say, well, hey, if I go, learn how to weld, I could, you know, run a little side hustle, and I could use that skill, or I could market myself in different industries. And so, you know, as a former high school teacher and as a former high school administrator, how do you think we can make the skills more apparent to students, and and to get to the teachers to reflect on that and say, okay, yes, I might have to teach this content, but how can we make the skills more apparent? How can students develop that while they're learning the same content?
What a couple of thoughts you mentioned within your last few statements, a side hustle. I think every high school student should be contemplating a side hustle throughout their career. There are so many additional ways to earn income and to earn some of your time back, freedom of time. So I think I was always talking about side hustles. Now I taught business, finance, economics, so it was sort of a natural segue. But we can expose. I guess I would go back to what I mentioned earlier about setting up our day and our structure. That there's time for curiosity. That there's time to say, yeah, I would love to learn how to use a bandsaw or to what is this? Well, I don't even understand what welding is. And we have to simply create more and more of those opportunities to expose students to these different things. I think that's the answer in and of itself. It doesn't have to be graded. It doesn't always have to be perfectly structured. And that's the tough part in education. We are bound by a schedule. I get that. But I think if we fall back on, am I creating exposure? Am I giving students X number of things to choose from? That's what serves students well. And again, without too many cliches, the ways students go about their career and our economy and putting dollars in their bank account is going to be very, very different in the future. But there are some commonalities that we can come back to, kind of a work ethic and exposure. Boy, I tried this, but I didn't like it, and that's okay to do that. Uh, so I think we can think in broad terms about creating exposure, increasing curiosity, allowing students to try things. Not everything has to be graded. And again, I know that's difficult because we're on a timeline. There's standards to be met. There's standards-based testing. But we can do that. We can embed some of that into our world, to our day. There's time, whatever that looks like. So I love high school sports. I'm a fan of all sports. As I said, I've been a coach my entire career. And I don't know about other states, but at least in Wisconsin, our school day is somewhat bound by sports and sports schedules. And again, I am an advocate of those experiences, but we need to rethink that sometimes too. Are we boxing our school day in because of the sports schedules and when the whatever team is going to out of town to this other team and so forth. So.
I want to just kind of one of the things that you mentioned early on in when you filled out just pre-work coming into the podcast is talking about innovative spaces and that the support of teachers. And I guess to kind of wrap up the conversation of innovation, how did you feel like you, towards the back end of your career, were still embodying the classroom that you were hoping others to, create for their kids? Again, you're dealing with 11th and 12th graders, mostly very independent. They're the fear of future career is right in front of their face. So I think sometimes you see the most mature student that anyone does many times, um, and especially in a area that, if you're talking about business and finance, hopefully they're taking a class like that very seriously because it has direct application to their life. So what is one of the things you mentioned is innovation in spaces and kind of the experience for kids. Do you feel like in the last few years, or as an administrator, you created a environment that allowed um, or just kind of modeled what you're speaking of?
You bet, Matt, and that's subtle. It's the way a teacher, projects and conducts himself in his or her classroom. It's trusting students. It's all of those items. It's simple things from the physical space not being just desks in a row. It's granting older students trust and privileges. Little things like, I wouldn't in my classroom. I know this is going to sound very small, but it pays dividends. If a junior or senior would come up to me meekly and say, "May I go to the bathroom?" I would say, "Listen, you don't have to come up and ask me like that. If I'm not speaking or the timing's right, just give me a little signal and just go." Now, again, some districts that doesn't work. We have to have order. We can't have kids,
In the
running around
hallways.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But little things like that, granting that, you can be innovative in your classroom, both in your approach, how you interact with students, your way you go about the curriculum. I worked really hard to get students out of school on field trips. I worked really hard to bring in some high-level guest speakers, whether it was in person or using a Google Meet. I was very, for lack of a better term, aggressive about emailing people at high levels in businesses or different organizations, and more people were willing to speak in my classroom than I ever imagined. Um, and students love that stuff. So, there's a myriad of ways. I'm not sure I answered your question specifically. There's an art and a science to teaching, and that art is 51%. The science of the structure of a lesson, the structure of formative and summative assessment, those things can be taught. But that art of teaching, the way you interact with students, your courtesy and kindness, what you do on a given day in your classroom. That is very difficult sometimes to impart to a younger teacher. But that art is what breeds more innovation. It creates a space of safety for the teacher, for the student, and then you can go above and beyond. And then to some extent, also, we really have to get away from any kind of memorizing. Uh, at least at the high school level, if it can be if it can be looked up quickly on Google, quit making students memorize things like that. Just get away from that. We should be leveraging the Google world and not spending time on that stuff in classrooms.
Yeah, for sure. And I love what you said about the art and the science. We've had a few guests talk about that, and it's interesting. Everybody's perspective is a little bit different. I like your 51 versus 49%. So kind of transitioning into that, you have so much experience in education. If you had we'll say a second year teacher sitting here with us. So first year, you're just literally trying to survive. So second year, you know what's coming. You have time to reflect on things you did, lessons you did last year that you get to try again this year, relationships, interactions. You get your second shot at the first day of school. So a second year teacher, what do you want to say to them? What do you think is, the few things that you can impart on them that is super important for them to have a more successful second year, but also have a more successful, 28 years after that?
Yeah, that's a big question, Ken. One of you used the term a roadmap earlier, and you know, education doesn't have a perfectly linear roadmap, whether it be the entire school year or a given day in a classroom. And a second year teacher should just relax a little bit. Keep in mind those relationships. Keep in mind that you may go a little in this direction, and then you come back in this direction, and you move in that direction. So to some extent, a second year teacher just has to relax into things. That doesn't mean the job is easy. Yeah, you have to be dedicated and bring your A game every day. Do not hang out with, do not converse with negative colleagues. Stay out of any negativity. Be strong about that. Um, Most of the districts I worked in, I felt were pretty positive, but I ate lunch alone sometimes, a lot of time. Uh, and that's okay. Stay true to your mission and why you got into this, and stay positive. Build others up. So a second year teacher has to relax into this profession and focus more on that art of teaching. And it can be done. It's going to be hard. You're going to put in a lot of hours, but you need to just embrace that.
I think it's such a slippery slope, and we've all experienced it. And the moment that you step in the classroom, it is something for a new teacher you hear a ton about. um, and the slippery slope is really when it changes from venting, which is healthy and we all need to do it, to when it turns non-productive. And I think that if you what you're speaking about is an environment that is distracting you from your goals, your vision, you know, and that is the feed to the burnout. That negativity is the feed of, those negative thoughts, the frustration, and I guess my question towards you, especially as like the administrator side, and then as a classroom teacher, school morale is a huge portion as well. And so being a catalyst for change and positivity, it seems like you probably did that by creating great experiences and being, a mentor to other teachers that came to you, and, the guidance. But there is this kind of feeling of responsibility to almost lift other teachers through a very hard career. We're sitting on the other end of this podcast listening to you as a newly retired teacher with envy and in all of, making it 28 careers in a really tough, field, a rewarding field, but a really tough field. How do you feel like you can manage coworker relationships and still bring out that positivity, because I think when you can foster that positivity, that's where it leads to the previous conversation of innovation. When we shift from venting to productive conversation, that's where it's like, oh, you know what, I have a friend that can come in and speak to your class about this, or oh, you're working on this in your class, I can reinforce it when I'm teaching them, the class before. What is that balance? Because just eating alone, I do it myself. It is, when we need to, a really important thing to do. But there is that, like, tricky double-edged sword of, you don't want to run away completely.
Yeah, that's a good point, Matt. You certainly don't want to run away. I guess if you're the administrator, that the culture of a school is an administrator's one of their primary responsibilities. Obviously, student safety is paramount, but administrators can't shirk that. They are responsible for the culture of a school. And also from an administrative perspective, you can't do uh, little things like chastise your whole staff for the transgressions of a few. I've seen that, young administrators, and your job as administrator is to sort of lower or remove barriers so that your best and brightest teachers can do their thing. And it's not easy, but another primary job of an administrator is to really hold teachers accountable, the teachers that aren't pulling their weight. And teaching is tough. It is. I'm not discounting that, and the need for self-care is important. But an administrator sets the tone of in a school. Now, if you're not an administrator, how can you affect change in your school? Well, most schools have a building leadership team or some level of a teacher voice. And if there's no structure like that, maybe you're not in the right school. I don't know, or maybe you have to talk about creating something like that. But there are ways we can all exercise leadership and positive leadership, even if it's only with the teacher that teaches on the right side of your classroom and the left side of your classroom. You could say, let's not talk about this. How can we change this? So there are ways we can step up whatever role we're in a school. But I guess I really challenge any administrators to realize that starts and stops with them, the culture that they're creating in a given school. And we also have a tendency sometimes to put more and more and more tasks on our best and brightest teachers. We have to be careful with that. We always have to be careful because those teachers are also ones that will say, "Sure, I'll help with that. I'll help with that." And pretty soon they're looking for a different job somewhere. So that no matter what our role in a school is, we have ways we can be a leader. Every single day, we can be a leader. And we just have to lean into that. It's not easy. There are times where we feel like we're burnt out, but we can push through that and come back strong.
Well, even just the way we carry ourselves on a daily basis, like you said, Terry, just being more positive, not joining in the negativity, modeling what it looks like to Matt say, vent and then ask for, okay, but how do I solve this problem? Not just ending it at the vent. I do agree. We can all be leaders in some capacity, whether formal or informal. So I want to transition into a segment we do sometimes, sometimes not, depends on how the conversation is going, our lesson lens, where we're going to ask you some specific questions about a lesson you've done, a unit, a project, something you've done over your career, or something that you are supporting now in your new role. However you want to take this segment, we're totally up for. So, question number one: are we going to look at a unit overview, a long-term project, or a single lesson?
Let's look at a unit overview.
Perfect.
All right. And when looking, so grade level and subject area, probably pretty obvious. But was this unit a specific time of year?
No, not necessarily. So this unit was called business ethics, and it was in a class called business management. It was what's called a college credit and high school class. But I had a wide variety of students take this class. They could take it simply for high school credit or for dual college credit. and it was sort of in the middle of this semester long course. And again, the title of the unit was Business Ethics. And we really got speaking about, this was a natural segue for other um, topics and lessons and to be embedded in this. And at its core, one of the outcomes I wanted to get students to understand and realize is that A, there are always ethical dilemmas in life. Not everything is so black and white. B, the most successful businesses are ethical businesses. And just the challenge that as humans we face on a day to day basis with always doing the right thing.
Very interesting. So I think you answered our third question, the objectives of the unit. So I'm gonna steal your next one, Matt. We can just switch. What were the students actively doing during this unit? What were things that they were actively exploring themselves?
Just a couple different activities that come to mind that I remember. They would sometimes read some cases about business ethics and what decision they would make. I'd certainly always have them in small groups, talking, working together. I recall during this unit, I kind of set up a couple ethical dilemmas, and I'd have a few students in on it. I would sort of prep them ahead of time, and then they'd play this game, and then a student or two would be cheating on purpose, and we'd sort of track sort of the responses of their opponents and so forth when they sort of lied to them on purpose. Um, and forget, oh, it's called a prisoner's dilemma. If you've ever heard of that sort of ethical scenario, and there's all kinds of ways you can set this up, and that really opens students' eyes to the that ethics are black and white, but as they unfold in the world, sometimes it gets a little gray, but it doesn't have to be. And then we did sort of some research on there is a list that an organization puts out called the world's most ethical companies. I think that's a bit of a misnomer in and of itself because every company should be ethical. How do you rank an ethical company? But it gave students pause to research a company that they found interesting and why this organization ranked them as ethical.
So, it seems like I can envision what the students are doing in that experience, debating and researching those type things. Throughout this unit, what would you say were your major responsibilities as the facilitator of the unit?
Yeah, my responsibility is always, uh, especially with teaching the upper level, you could take a real hands-off approach once you set things up appropriately, and when you explain things appropriately. I think one of the mistakes I see young teachers make is they'll think they're explaining everything, and then an activity of some sort starts, and then they're interrupting the class, and you got to have that flow. So my responsibility was to do a really good job of setting up some of these scenarios or activities, and then do my best to kind of step back and let them unfold and just kind of walk around the room. And I think to some extent, having seniors, you can do that. There's a little less misbehavior type things, but on some levels, we can do that in all classrooms. We have to let some things unfold a little bit, and there's value in that learning and that unscripted, scripted sort of activity. So my role was to step back a little bit and allow them to discover some of these things on their own, and then on the back end to create opportunities for reflection. I think that's where the real learning happens, is to create the appropriate opportunities for reflection.
So I think you you dabbled into this last question a little bit, but I'll still probe you for a little bit more. So if you decide to pull out your retirement and go right back in next year, is there anything you would do different about the way you approach this unit to make it a little bit more innovative, a little bit more student centered, even though you showcased how student centered it was? But any advice you would give yourself for approaching a unit like this again?
I'm not sure I would do anything drastically different. I would, you could open up the news today, and you'd find where somebody did something wrong, did something inappropriate in a company. And, I would always try to make sure I'm inserting elements of, look what happened here, look at all that this person had, and they seem like such a great individual, and a few bad decisions created this. So I think I would keep, connecting it to things.
Right. Yeah. Keep it current with current events, not always
Yes,
using the same
yes.
articles year in and year out. Yeah.
I want to just ask a question before we move on. So one of the things that you just mentioned is your role in a student heavy lesson is really, capitalizing on teachable moments. And it is the reflection. It's focusing on that reflection, which is probably one of the harder skills to incorporate in the classroom. And the only reason I want to highlight this is, a newer teacher, we talk about higher order thinking and, high level questioning skills, but it is uncomfortable. I can see in this situation, you bring an ethic style scenario or model and you have a facilitated conversation, but you have opinions, and that can be a little daunting as a new teacher to say, yeah, this is how. It's almost like you can't plan out your reflection. How do you feel like through your years and experience you felt more and more comfortable to feel confident on the back end of the lesson that it was going to be as productive as possible?
That's a great question. Gosh, Matt, I think some of that comes with experience. Some of that comes with realizing that, not every day, not every lesson, not every hour has this perfect roadmap, and you have to be okay with, a little uncertainty here and there, uh, because you know that long term you're going to pull things back together for that science part of teaching. You have to be okay with letting some things unfold. You have to be okay with some uncertainty. You have to approach it with a, I guess I'd call it a calm confidence yourself. So that's on the teacher because we live in a clock-driven world in education, and I'm finding now that I'm in a little bit of a different career that we don't have to be so clock-driven always. Yes, the day starts now and ends now, but in between that, we have to be okay with some uncertainty, and students learn in that reflective time. And uh, so I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. So I want to jump into our last segment, the exit ticket, where we ask the same four questions to every guest every week. Question number one: what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Courtesy, kindness, relationships. It's so small, but I always made a point to say hello, good morning to every single student that walked in my room, and I would use their name. And a student actually told me that once, that while you are the only teacher that does that, it made me a little bit sad. So I would say acknowledge students as real human beings, know that they come from very different backgrounds, and just be kind to every single student, particularly that student that is frustrating to you.
Absolutely. Um, this might be a fun one to hear. So, what is the best piece of advice throughout your career that you've received that you thought of frequently or still think of frequently? And it could have been from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student.
Wow, that's a tough one. Yeah, that is the best piece of advice. Uh, my very first principal, my very first principal was doing an observation on me, what feels like 106 years ago. Uh, and we were talking about some current events, and the conversation was veering from anything that I felt was, business related. And I kind of wrapped up, but the students were very engaged, and I wrapped up the conversation and moved on to the science of teaching. When I had my post observation conference with this administrator, he very first thing he said was, he was kind of blunt. Uh, why on earth? He probably said, "Why the hell did you stop that discussion?" Um, and I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "You had every kid's attention. You had them on a string." And he said, "If you think the only thing you can teach them is stuff about business, you got another thing coming. You should have kept going with that discussion." And I had stopped at it because I wanted to move on to the science of teaching and what the lesson and objective was that day. And it just got me overall thinking about that soft side of teaching, that art of teaching. So,
I love, that honest feedback. Yeah. Um, eh, so you've experienced this 28 years of this that the school year kind of goes in waves of beginning of the school year, we're always super excited. The weather's starting to get poor, and that mood starts to dip, right? And there are days that you just struggle to survive. Just keep your head up. That might be conferences, report cards, etc. So, what is something you thought of, or you feel like educators in those moments of struggle need to hear to power up and make it through?
Yeah, I think some of that responsibility falls on your building administrator and removing that busy work and refocusing you on why we all, I mean, you guys are in Pennsylvania, I'm in Wisconsin. I guarantee we got into education for the same reasons, the same reason someone in Iowa did and New Hampshire did. And we have to just pull back that focus. We have to find moments of brevity, moments of laughter, and support each other. So yeah, a school year has those very distinct ups and downs, but we have to be supportive of our colleagues. We do have to take care of ourselves, but always falling back on the bigger issue of why we got into this, and never losing sight of that. It's okay to acknowledge that it's a tough job. It's very difficult. Sometimes the public doesn't see that, but we can you know stand strong through that. We do get a paycheck. And this is our job. And some days we got to step into that arena, whether we feel like it or not. So, and we can be that light amongst our colleagues. Um, if we have a spouse or a significant other that is not in this profession, sometimes it's a little hard for them to relate. But vent to the right people. Go take a run, do some push-ups, yell something. Um, we can do it, and it's okay to acknowledge those ups and downs and the flow of a school year. I fully understand that, but build each other up.
Absolutely. I love that answer. So, our last question, we've kind of dabbled in this conversation a little bit. So, to kind of boil it down, it's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What is it that you think separates the teachers who are constantly seeking change, innovation, and applying new teaching strategies?
A couple things. I hate to keep going back to the administrator, but if you have an administrator that encourages that, wow, you just have an open door to try different and new things, as we should. So to some extent, it's your building administrator. To some extent, it's our own motivation and desires, and we have to keep, fanning those flames, if you will. The culture of our building, the culture of our community, and some of those things we can very directly affect, and other things we can't. So, we can do that. But building administrators that are listening, I challenge you, reflect. Are you doing that? Are you creating those conditions for your teachers or not? And if you don't have a building administrator that's doing that, well, that's out of your control. You didn't hire him or her. So what can you do then within the context of your little world, your sphere of influence, your circle? So
A lot of times, if you do great things in your classroom, the kids, you know, advocate for it in its own right. So the last question we have for you is really kind of how an audience can continue to follow you. And I know that you've hinted at this a little bit, but you are not, sailing off into the sunset by any means. What is your next adventure, and is there a way that we can continue to support you as you continue your love of education?
sure. Uh, One of my other loves is healthy living, a healthy lifestyle. And I work for an amazing company in Green Bay, Wisconsin, called Fork Farms. And Fork Farms uh, has hydroponic units that one of our primary partners around the U.S. is education, K-12 education, in addition to food banks and other businesses. So I'm just really excited about continuing to have a connection to the K-12 world, and to sort of marry that, to bridge that with my interest and love of a healthy lifestyle. So you could go on that company's website, forkfarms.com. I know, Matt, you've had some actual connections with Fork Farms already. I'm on Twitter, as you know. I think that's how we connected. Um, I had tweeted at the end of my career just a very innocuous tweet that said something about Well, that's a wrap. 28 years in education. And I don't always like this term, but that tweet went viral. I ended up with like 6,000 likes and hundreds of retweets. And someone, I guess, relatively famous perhaps got a hold of it and retweeted, and it just went from there. Um, so no, I'm still active in some of the things I'm interested in. Again, this company I'm working for is just amazing in their mission and what they're trying to do with providing more fresh food around the world. So you could contact me, Terry at forkfarms.com, or through my Twitter handle, which I'm not even sure what it is.
That's all
Sure
right. We
can.
will we'll link to everything in our show
Thank you.
notes page, which can be found at poweredup.com/show83. So we'll link your Twitter account up there, as well as list your email on the website to Fork Farms. It's a great company that I was familiar with before talking today, that I wasn't even aware that you were involved with. So it's definitely something to look into. It's very applicable to the K-12 space, as well as just, like you said, overall a bigger mission of creating healthier eating opportunities for more people. So it's definitely something to look into. Terry, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate your insight, your wisdom, and just hearing about your experience, your reflections on education. And I'm excited that you're still involved in the K-12 space in a different area, so you can continue to create an impact on teachers and on students. Your schools and your school districts that had you for so long were clearly very lucky to have you as a part of their organization. So please continue to fight the good fight and create impact on education as you are. If you have not already, please subscribe to our podcast, whether it be on YouTube or the platform that you're listening on currently. Like, retweet, share out, leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Anything you can do to help us reach more educators, not for the benefit of Matt and I, but for the benefit of teachers being able to hear the amazing insight and wisdom that they hear from Terry today and from the other amazing guests that we have each and every week. So thank you as always, and you can follow us on social media at Power EDU Up. So Matt, why don't you wrap things up and take us on out of here?
All right. As we power down this episode, Terry, you left us feeling powered up. We're excited to continue to follow along in your journey, and look forward to the conversation next week. We'll talk to you then.
Keep doing great things, you guys. I commend the both of you also. Be epic, not average. You're living that. So stay tough, stay energetic in this profession. And I commend you for what you're doing with this podcast and everything that you're doing in education.
Thank you so much. That's awesome.
Thanks, Terry.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.